This is actually First Draft's very first bootcamp of our new flexible learning course on vaccine misinformation. So today we will go over some broad topics as well as essential concepts. And if you're not familiar with us, we're First Draft, an organization that helps journalists, academics, organizations, and the general public build resilience against harmful, misleading information. So we're really excited to be with you here because we've been developing a bunch of resources that are specifically about vaccine misinformation. And one of which is our Vaccine Insights Hub, just launched on our website. And you can see it at firstdraftnews.org/vaccine insights. It has a whole bunch of very useful information there. We have updated a lot of vaccine narratives that our editorial team is tracking. We've got search tips for monitoring misinformation. We've got information about Google Trends related to vaccine misinformation. So please go ahead and check it out. Also, you can go to the same website for the registration links to sign up for our upcoming 30-minute flexible learning courses. And so all the information is there, including the sign-up links. And one last thing, we have a new Vaccine Insights newsletter that we just launched, and you can sign up for that as well by going to this link, bit.ly/vaccine newsletter. And just to introduce myself, my name is Esther Chan. I'm First Draft's APAC Bureau Editor, and I'm based in Sydney. You can also become friends with me on Twitter on this handle. So today we are going to talk about three main things. The first is some case studies looking at why different communities around the world have lost trust in vaccines. And then we're going to talk about some of the research that our team did into vaccine misinformation, some of the big themes that we found. And lastly, we're going to talk about some tactics for spreading misinformation. That is, how the people who spread misinformation do so effectively. And without further ado, let's talk about trust in vaccines. So in this session, we're going to look at a few case studies from around the world that help us understand why certain communities lack trust in vaccines. And the first one is Pakistan. So Pakistan is one of the few countries where polio is still endemic. In April 2019, there were a bunch of misleading videos claiming that kids were falling ill from the polio vaccine. And then the efforts to vaccinate Pakistani children, especially in the northern city of Peshawar, came to a standstill. So once these videos went viral, there was panic, and then there were reports saying that about 25,000 children in Pakistan were rushed to the hospitals. The Deputy Police Commissioner, Muhammad Ali Ashkar, told CNN at the time, people rushed to the loudspeakers of nearby mosques, barring people to stop polio drops to their children. They also suggested people to take their children to hospital immediately, as some poisonous material has been added to the vaccine. So you can see in this chart that the polio cases in Pakistan has started to be contained in recent years. But then when these misleading videos were shared in 2019, you can see how trust fell and the polio cases just skyrocketed. This is a sort of a similar graph showing Google search interest on related keywords, such as polio vaccine, polio drops, polio Pakistan, etc. And then you can see how the search interest was pretty low. And then by 22nd of April, when these misleading videos started circulating online, the interest spiked. The thing is, though, the people probably had good reason to be worried in this same region in northern Pakistan about the polio vaccine, because about 8 years ago in 2011, the CIA orchestrated a failed vaccination campaign to obtain Osama bin Laden's family DNA. So there was actually a real instance of Western influence. And this is interesting, broadly speaking, because as we often notice from our research, misinformation and conspiracy theories often have a kernel of truth. In the case of Pakistan, we can safely say that the mistrust that erupted over the polio vaccine in 2019 was also against this backdrop of a recent event in history. So what can we learn from this? First of all, misleading videos may have sparked the breakdown in trust, but there was also a real history of Western influence exploiting health workers in the same region. So for sure, misinformation was a problem and it was a spark for the loss in confidence, but there were historical problems that set people up for it. Our next case study is the Philippines with the Dengvaxia controversy. So what is dengue fever? Dengue fever is a mosquito-borne viral infection now endemic in more than 100 countries around the world, including the Philippines. And let's take a look at the timeline, which shows a gradual erosion in public trust in the vaccine. So in December 2015, the Dengvaxia vaccine was registered in the Philippines to fight the rising spread of dengue fever. 3 months later, in March 2016, some health experts vocalized hesitation about the vaccine. And then a month later, in April, they started a school-based vaccination program with Dengvaxia, and more than 800,000 people were vaccinated at this point of time. But then, in the same month, the producer of Dengvaxia, Sanofi, announced that the vaccine may be dangerous in some rare cases of children who haven't had the infection. So in the following year, in November 2017, the Philippine government actually did a policy 180 and halted the whole vaccination program, which set off a moral panic, as you can imagine. And then in January the following year, there was a protracted Senate investigation about Dengvaxia. And there were viral claims that children were dying from the vaccine, media amplification of all of that. So what happened was basically in 3 years' time, from 2015, when Dengvaxia was registered in the Philippines, to January 2018, during the Senate investigation, vaccine confidence plummeted by 60%. According to data from the Vaccine Confidence Index, in 2015, there was 93% of people saying that they were confident in vaccine. But then following the dengue vaccine controversy, it went down to 32% in 2018. So what we can learn from this case study, as well as the Pakistan misleading claims, is that we're only one part of the breakdown in trust. In both of these cases, misinformation played an important role, but as you can see, the contextual backdrop to it was pretty different. In the case of Pakistan, there were historical reasons to mistrust the intentions of the vaccination project because of Western influence in the past. And then here we also had the fact that the Philippines suspended the whole vaccination program instead of just introducing stricter guidelines on labeling or other measures after the Sanofi announcement. So here's the thing, the differences in context are important because they help you understand why people don't trust the vaccine. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. Now let's look at some other reasons why people don't trust the vaccine and how they differ basically. According to the Kaiser Family Foundation's COVID-19 vaccine monitor, in the US, Republicans and Black adults are most likely to be vaccine hesitant. But as with the other case studies that we've looked at, you can see that the reasons for that mistrust are different. So this is a chart that lays out the reasons for vaccine hesitancy by party identification, age, race, and ethnicity. In the case of Republicans, the main reason people are hesitant about getting the vaccine, or definitely not, or probably not getting the vaccine, is because they think the risk of COVID-19 are being exaggerated. They don't think it's as risky as the media and politicians are making out to be. But if you look at Black Americans, you can see that they don't share the same opinion. Only 33% of Black Americans think that the risks of COVID-19 are being exaggerated. However, they are concerned about other things. So 71% of them are worried about possible side effects. And similar to that, 71% of people think that the vaccine is too new and want to wait to see how it works for other people. This could very well be because of historical events that happened in the US that targeted people of color in vaccination programs and testing. So even though Republicans and Black Americans are two demographic groups that are least likely to get vaccinated, the reasons that they cite are quite different. And next up, looking at Hispanic adults, you can see the same theme again of concern about the politicization of the vaccine. So for Hispanic adults, they trust their own doctors, but not so much politicians. And this also kind of ties back to the Philippines case study, because in that case, it was partially the political response to the vaccine that drove down trusts. So I'm going to sum up this section with a quote from Dr. Heidi Larson of the Vaccine Confidence Project. She says, "I saw how much of the communication strategies were very much driven by what the public health community and immunization people thought the public needed to know, but they weren't responding to what people's concerns were, or issues, or questions." So if you want to fight vaccine misinformation, you really need to understand what people's concerns were, and everyone's concern is different. It depends on the community that you're talking to. And if you want to get good quality information out to the public, you just cannot ignore what people's questions and concerns are. You need to have thoughtful communication strategy. You have to know what the concerns and questions are, and then how they differ between different communities. And moving on, in this session, we are going to talk about a few themes of vaccine misinformation from First Draft's research. So last year, we did an analysis of 1,200 vaccine-related social media posts, and we analyzed the different themes in vaccine misinformation that we found. So two of the biggest themes that were dominant across the languages that we did this research in, which were English, French, and Spanish, were political and economic motives, as well as safety, efficacy, and necessity. So this shouldn't really be surprising based on the case studies that we just went through. And another thing that we found is that vaccine misinformation differs across different languages. And the 6 narratives that we found, most of the information fell into were political and economic motives, safety, efficacy, and necessity, development, provision, and access, conspiracy theories, liberty and freedom, as well as morality and religion. So there are also differences between the themes that are popular in a particular language. So for example, while liberty and freedom is very much a big narrative among English-speaking social media users, we did not see it at all in Spanish-speaking social media. On the other hand, vaccine narratives that have to do with morality and religion were quite common among Spanish-speaking social media users and quite rare in the English-speaking online space. Also, the platforms where we found vaccine misinformation also differs according to the language. One thing that we found was true across the board was that vaccine misinformation is pretty prominent on Instagram. And it's much more prominent on Instagram than it is on Twitter. So this is one of the things that makes this interesting, is that a lot of research focuses on Twitter, and there isn't as much research about misinformation on Instagram. And this could be for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons might just be that Instagram is a very visual platform, and images can be harder to analyze than text. So if you're thinking about how to fight vaccine misinformation, it might be in your interest to understand the platforms where it's proliferating. And in this case, Instagram is very much a major platform where this type of information is proliferating. And you can see this in our chart as well. Our research found that Facebook and Instagram were the main driving force behind the vaccine discourse on social media. So in the next session, I'm going to walk you through some of the main tactics we've seen for spreading vaccine misinformation. One of the main tactics that we've seen is headline laundering, which is basically what happens when someone recycles a negative or ambiguous bit of news, especially where the headline doesn't tell the whole story. So in this example, in the Facebook group Open Oregon, there's a post that says, "No need to quarantine if you had both doses of the vaccine. See where this is headed." And it links to an article saying that the state of Oregon was revising their quarantine guidelines for vaccinated people. So this sparked a number of theories in the comment section. One of them, for example, was that this was just a way to get everybody to take the vaccine, because if you don't want to be quarantined, then you better get the vaccine, right? And next up, conspiracy theories. So conspiracy theories vary, but one thing that they often have in common is that they feed off of deep distrust of politicians, political actors, and institutions. And seeing what happened in Pakistan, you can see how some people might have good reason to. Another big theme that we see repeatedly is that vaccine misinformation is overwhelmingly driven by videos and photos. Compelling misinformation often comes in the form of visuals because visual content is difficult to fact check. And counter messaging like long form articles and debunks is just not as flashy and may not compete as well. A lot of misinformation about the vaccine also comes from old misinformation tropes, and we call it zombie content. For example, the purported link between the MMR vaccine, which is used against measles, and autism. So we see these narratives just being recycled over and over again, just in different forms. So to sum up today's session, we've learned that even if two groups of people or two different countries are both distrustful of vaccines, then mistrust could be caused by very different reasons. And we've looked at the 6 narratives of vaccine misinformation from First Draft's research, and they are political and economic motives, safety, efficacy, and necessity, development, provision, and access, conspiracy theories, liberty and freedom, as well as morality and religion. And then we discussed some common tactics used to weaponize uncertainty, such as headline laundering, conspiracy theories, the use of visuals, as well as zombie content. So thank you so much for sticking with me. And before I end this session with more details about our upcoming webinars and resources about vaccine misinformation,